welcome to Fourth Revelations. Is that right? Fifth. Well, what we want to talk about this time is how campaigns end or die. I think the theme is probably going to be people who have played games like this before will recognize this, but it might be a surprise to newcomers that most campaigns do not end as a result of the plot being concluded in some satisfying way. Most games end as the result of scheduling conflicts and other logistics issues.
Yeah, they might trail off or abruptly end, or something like that. I don't know if I would say most, but at least a substantial portion.
Yeah, I think I've run and played in, I don't know, a half dozen campaigns by this point. Something long enough that I'd call them a campaign. And I think only 2 have resolved plot-wise. The rest have kind of either ended abruptly or as you described, kind of faded midstream. So unlike the other stuff that we've talked about, neither of us have significant notes here. I figured we would just talk about how our different campaigns have ended. Maybe we can come up with a couple of observations or like things. I guess this is very much in the realm of things to think about if you are starting a campaign. Just understand what might happen, figure out what you are cool with, and maybe things you can do to mitigate the things that you're not cool with.
Yeah.
So, do you have anything to add before I dive right into like story time?
No, I'll get to my stories, I'm sure.
Okay. So the first campaign I participated in was one that you ran. That was really my introduction to D&D, and that was relatively short from a number of sessions standpoint.
Yes, it was 10 sessions, not including any of the Session 0 stuff.
Okay. Oh, so very short, actually.
Yeah.
But I want to say we played over, a 4-month period?
If it was longer than that, it wasn't much longer than that.
But it wasn't 10 sessions over the course of 2 weeks or something like that. Yeah, it was months.
No.
They tended to be...
Well, I will say, if we're going to talk about... Oh, go on.
Oh, no, go ahead.
No, I was going to say, with that one, it had the potential to be much longer. There was a whole, at least another half of that campaign that I had planned on doing, but it was going so poorly in my eyes that I just erased the second half, and said, forget it. Like there's a whole bunch more like lore and other things going on behind the scenes that I just deleted and said, never mind, we're not going to do that.
I guess this will come as a surprise to some of our listeners, but you and I are both, I would say, strong personalities. And at the time, we were clashing.
Yes,
and
yeah.
Much of that clashing was occurring at the table.
Yes.
It was not helped by both of us being bad at this at the time. So we were
relatively
frustrating each other at the table, and then other like life stuff was bubbling up as a result. So, yeah, well, that does raise a good point though, which is, so we play for 10 sessions. They were in-person sessions with a small group, and scheduling was an issue. We didn't play at a regular time. We played when we could, which is challenging.
Yeah.
And I think that's tempting when you have a group of people that you really want to play with, but people have busy schedules, is you're like, well, we'll just we're not going to try to carve out a specific time. We're not going to play Thursday evenings or something like that. We'll just figure it out at the end of each session, like when the next session will be. That's hard.
Yeah.
But then I guess scheduling tools and stuff like that is something I want to talk about. But what you said made me think about was kind of in keeping with what we talked about last time with homebrew and modules and things like that. Consider if you want it to continue. It's not... I think a lot of times people just take for granted that, I need to figure out a way to make this work, and they maybe don't take a step back and reevaluate and go, this actually hasn't been much fun. Or I'm tired of this particular setting or group or system. Maybe it's time to take a break or end the campaign, wrap it up. Maybe it's time to dissolve the group or make some changes to it. I don't know. What do you think about all that?
Yeah, I mean, I do think that there are often going to be growing pains with a group. You and I have both experienced that, both with the group that's on the podcast as well as with groups outside of it. It sometimes more time helps as people just get more used to each other, more used to the game and that kind of stuff. Sometimes there needs to be some sort of intervention, like a deliberate attempt to make changes to a group, i.e., the DM has a sit down with the players and says, hey, I really need you guys to focus more at the table, or hey, we need to be able to have a little more rigidity with their schedule, or whatever, for any kind of issue. And sometimes more radical changes are required, like what you were alluding to of kicking people out, changing the group, ending stuff. It's depending on the nature of the issues. There's always going to be some friction. So if there's some friction at your table, listener, that doesn't mean that your table is unsavable or fundamentally flawed in some way that's unrecoverable.
Yeah.
So I do want to say that.
I totally agree with that, but I'll refer listeners back to advice that I think I've given pretty frequently, which is I think the most important variable you can control in terms of game quality on all fronts is who you invite. Yeah. It's the people there. There's a lot of other stuff like whether or not you're in person or virtual, or what system you're using, or what time of day you play, or all that stuff is important, but it's all overshadowed by who the group is. Yeah. And I guess there's a time element to this as well, though. Like, obviously, you and I get along very well now, and are like frequent. I don't know how to characterize this. Like, we've been doing this stuff together for a long time. We bounce ideas off of each other constantly. I play in most of the stuff you run and vice versa. And that's awesome. And years ago when we did this campaign, it was not awesome. Yes. So it doesn't mean like not getting along right now. It doesn't mean you're forever doomed to be enemies.
Right. Yeah. And I would call that growing pains, like I said. Yeah. But growing to be better is one way that can turn out, and growing to be much worse is, or growing to end is another way. So yes, it's there's no way to to come up with some hard and fast rule. Like, you just need to be attentive and kind of figure out what direction it's going, or not figure out, but guess and try to make adjustments if that makes sense. But I'm trying to be cognizant that most listeners aren't just coming here for TTRPG conversation. They're coming here for life advice. Yeah, for sure. And this is really relationship advice, I guess, in general. Yes. So, if you're not getting along right now, don't worry about it. But don't force it. Yeah, don't force it. But if you don't force it, then something will go wrong, so. Right. No. But yeah, it's interesting. One of the things I was thinking about, let's keep going through history. Okay. Because we already got derailed. After that campaign, which, as we said, ended early, but was resolved from a plot standpoint. Yeah. We knew going in, this is going to be the final session, this is the big boss fight, and then we finished it, we went our separate ways. And I think, despite what I just said about you and I not getting along very well at the time, we almost immediately segued into me planning to run a very large, ambitious campaign that you were going to play in. Yes, yeah. The time between my last session and your first session was not that long. No, and because all of the advice I just gave about, hey, consider if maybe you don't want to do this anymore or not with the same people, was not at all what I was thinking at the time. Right, me neither. We were both very invested in playing more D&D,
we were both fighting with each other, and I don't think ever occurred to either of us that maybe we should play separately. No, we were just gonna fight. So we went into planning Tomb of Annihilation, which was different. It involved some of the same people, a couple of new people, because we shifted from an in-person model to a virtual one where we were using Roll20 with Discord, so the same thing everyone else does.
Yeah.
And I want to say initially we scheduled it the same way. It was like we would decide as a group when the next session was going to be, but pretty quickly moved to, we picked a weekend day. We were playing on Sundays. And we were playing long sessions.
Much, much longer.
Like between 4 and 8 hours long.
Yeah, I'd say the average was probably about 4 or 5 hours.
Yes, but there were a couple ones that were long. So, and that was something like a 45 session campaign.
It was 31 sessions.
31.
Not including Monster of the Week stuff.
Okay, so probably somewhere in the 40s with Monster of the Week, or maybe a little more. I don't know.
Probably about 40. But yeah.
But anyway, but considerably longer. And that one also ended with plot resolution.
Yes.
Like we reached the end of the module. The group changed along the way. I think we started with 6 players, like 1 DM and 6 players, and then we finished with 1 DM and 4 players.
That sounds correct, yeah.
So we started with 6 players, we ended with 4 players, and I think that was about as successful from a logistics standpoint as you could hope a campaign like that would be. We played for a year.
And considering the initial bad chemistry at the beginning, it's a better outcome than one might expect on average.
Yeah, and that that had a few causes. Probably the biggest one though was I had never run anything like this before. Yeah. And that's a cause that manifests several different problems. One was that I prepared in a lot of ways that I no longer think are effective. Mm-hmm. And failed to prepare a lot of things I should have. I was very ambitious with the amount of content I wanted to work in, but I didn't focus on other stuff that made the game fun. And then I was just kind of, I was slow running it because people would ask questions and want to engage with things that caught me off guard. And so I was doing a lot of looking up and pausing, and then kind of that classic junior DM thing of I would spend a lot of time preparing something that people wouldn't engage with, and I would be frustrated by that. And at the same time, people are then engaging with other things that I wasn't expecting, and so they're very shallow. I think it was bumpy at the beginning, but over time, I got more confident and capable. The group developed better chemistry, and we kind of figured out what was fun. But it was a very different campaign by the end.
Yeah, I agree with that.
But I don't remember us having any significant conversations about how far along are we, how many sessions are left, likely. But it was clear based on the plot where to go to wrap things up, and
yes,
people.
Well, because we kind of entered the final city, and we knew that we were in the final city, but
right.
we spent I think 10 sessions there or so.
Well, so Tomb of Annihilation really does end in kind of a mega dungeon.
Yeah, it's pretty massive.
Because it's, spoilers. The content. This is something I should have talked about at the module thing. When you look at the book, you're like, oh, this is interesting. There are several very large, well-thought-out locations here, like big dungeons. And then when you actually play through it, you realize these are stacked right on top of each other.
Yes.
you effectively do these back to back, probably. And so there's nothing like it until the very end, and then the last chapter of the campaign is 30 sessions. It's long.
Yeah. Because I'm looking at the list now. We spent 3 sessions just in the pre-final tomb, which is basically just us fighting a bunch of snake people.
Yeah.
And then 5 sessions in the actual Tomb of Annihilation, or whatever it's called, at the end. And then with another session on the end that I just called the end, which I think is us fighting the final boss.
Well, but before that, there's Omu, right? They're like the puzzle temples.
So, yeah. And, so we had 3 sessions just in the overworld of Omu, and then 3 sessions in the snake pit, and then 5 in the dungeon, and then 1 final one.
So I guess the nugget, or the couple of nuggets I think people should take out of this are, it is probably helpful to give your players some sense of how long it would take in order to resolve the plot.
Yeah.
I guess stepping back even further, something that I make a point of doing now most of the time is, if I'm going to be running something, whether I intend for it to take 1 session or 100 sessions, is the group involved, like I talk to them and say, okay, how long do we think we're going to be able to continue on this schedule?
Yeah.
Like, if you guys want to play on Monday nights, is someone moving next month? Like, is anyone about to have a kid?
Yeah.
That kind of stuff, because ideally, like, I would prefer that we resolve the plot. I think that's more satisfying. And so I try to make sure that works. And in my open table, and we'll talk more about this in a little while, I basically divide the larger campaign into little chapters.
Yeah.
And so I kind of post on this shared OneNote document that we use as a bulletin board, the different quests. I basically post a quest log, kind of video game style, and they're not restricted to that, but it gives them an example of, hey, you talked to this guy and he said that cave full of goblins needs to be cleared out. That's this is like a classic goblin beat 'em up kind of thing, and it's probably going to take about 3 sessions.
Mm-hmm.
And then when one of the players, Steve, says, oh, I'm really interested in that. Does anyone else want to do this? He gets a couple of other people to join in. And then they say, hey, Duncan, I want to do the goblin thing. This group wants to do it, and we're free for the next 3 Monday nights. And I say, okay, great, then we'll do that. Basically, the entering argument to even executing that is that the group who wants to do it commits to the number of sessions I think it's going to take.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, and I think that brings up an interesting point with kind of going back to our homebrew versus module conversation, where I think that one of the benefits of doing something that's homebrew, and more specifically like kind of a free form and not like a pre-planned narrative kind of campaign, is that you can end it kind of whenever, or you can change direction, right? Because you haven't set in front of them some big goal at the end that if they haven't done that, then they, haven't won. So, i.e., Curse of Strahd. Well, if you haven't beaten Strahd, then, you haven't finished it. Whereas if we're generating our own goals and doing, smaller little pieces of progress, if we realize this is coming to an end, we can end it. We can pick something and say that'll be the end. And nobody's wrong, and we didn't necessarily miss anything. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Now, I don't think it has to be this way. And I mean, I don't think it always is this way. Clearly, a lot of people are out there running and playing in campaigns where there isn't a specific plot that needs to be resolved in a specific way. It's just, your group of friends plays in this D&D game, and you kind of chain a bunch of things together, and the important thing is that you guys are hanging out, and maybe there isn't a well-defined story arc that needs to be wrapped up. I think it's very normal.
Mm-hmm.
Yet another thing we're going to revisit when I talk about my current coworker group. But yeah, I think communication about timelines is important.
Yeah, and it's probably worth, in that session 0 or even before session 0, when you're talking about availability, like if people, much to your point that you bring up frequently, like there are going to be people who are just incompatible. If one guy is only free on weekends and one guy is only free on weekdays, like doesn't matter how much you want these two people to be in the same group, it's just not going to work. And that's obviously like an example of something that is definitely not going to work. But there are other things that are going to be so frustrating that even if it's theoretically possible, it's just not worth it. I.e., one guy is usually working nights, and everyone else works days in some capacity. And like trying to get that guy who's on nights into your game, it might just be such a hassle that it's not worth trying to fight too hard to make it happen.
Yes. Yeah. Well, okay, moving on through the history. So we finished our Tomb of Annihilation campaign, took a break, and I do really value breaks.
Mm-hmm.
I have found that if I take a break after a campaign, and maybe this is more of a DMing thing than a playing thing, but I don't know. It'll depend on kind of who you are. There are, like as a DM, you have a considerable amount of work to do with respect to planning and executing a campaign. And so you can get kind of bogged down in the day-to-day and get annoyed by like logistics and things like that. But get a little bit of distance from it and you will probably appreciate the campaign more in retrospect.
Mm-hmm.
And so it was not long after we finished Tomb of Annihilation, and all of us had our issues with that campaign, that all of us were saying, man, it would be a lot of fun to play again.
Yeah.
So we started playing Curse of Strahd. And we had been playing other things in the interim, just not regularly and not long stuff.
Yeah.
So we had been doing that, and we had been doing other things. Like the group was still very much together doing stuff.
We were playing Mothership a lot, I remember.
Yep. We had started playing Delta Green.
Mm-hmm. More frequently, yeah.
Video games and other things. But yeah, so we started Curse of Strahd, and that's of course when we started the podcast as well. And that was, we were considerably more organized with Curse of Strahd, I think in part because of the podcast.
Yeah.
We needed to play at a particular time, because there was actually work on the back end for you in particular to cut the stuff together. I think all of us had to be a little more deliberate about when and how we played, because for the first time we really cared about audio quality. So, you can't just kind of play from wherever. You can't do it in a room where other people are making noise. Like now you really have to put yourself in a dedicated, space and...
you can't be doing laundry while you're doing this.
Right, which I think is a really good thing. Like, people were very screwed in.
Yeah.
But it does impose more of a limitation. I would argue it just highlights a pre-existing limitation. When people play, you want them to pay attention.
Yeah.
And I am definitely guilty of playing in virtual games and doing things that I would find completely unacceptable from my players at an in-person game.
Right. Yeah.
It kind of the like telework equivalent of just sitting around in your boxers.
Right.
And it's like, well, if I'm just going to be playing this game, like I probably don't have to roll anything for a couple of minutes, so why don't I fold some laundry? And it's a short step from that to like, why don't I do the dishes? You're not playing at that point.
Hey, can you text me when it's my turn? I gotta,
Right, that's fucked up. So anyway, we did this, and then we did not resolve the plot in that campaign.
Right.
We played for a while, close to a year, right?
Yeah, it was like just outside of a year, I think.
Although I think our frequency had really dropped by the time we stopped. And what had happened there was Well, on the one hand, it was easier to schedule things because we had fewer players. We had 3 players, and the DM, and so just
and at
less.
the time, relatively predictable schedules as well.
Right. And so that was good. It was 3 people who communicated regularly. So, like, we were able to coordinate, which is not a given.
Right.
And we just didn't have that many calendars we needed to work with. So, towards the end, what happened is a series of life events that totally shook up that scheduling situation.
Yeah.
So I changed jobs and moved, and it was a major move, like a cross country move.
Right.
So I didn't go immediately from like one furnished setup to another. It was bumpier than that. And then, well, let's see. I did that.
Nerf had a kid.
And I
was about to move.
Yes. Right. And those things didn't happen concurrently. They kind of happened one after the other.
Yeah, it was over the course of like maybe 4 total months or so.
Right. And that just wiped us out. And
yeah.
And what happens then is, it becomes harder to get to a session. And then when you do get to a session, it really needs to be a good one.
Yeah.
But it's not, because we don't remember what happened last time. And so, much higher likelihood that people show up and don't know what's going on. Much higher likelihood that we introduce continuity errors and stuff like that. And I mean from the DM and the players. Like, it's just, we just haven't been in it. It's not as fresh. And the whole reason why is you're busy. And so, maybe you haven't listened to the episode recently. So, what killed me though, like what causes burnout in my case, it's not usually overindulging. It's not running or playing in too many games. It's, I guess what I see as, unsuccessful investments or, I don't know, like spurned advances. Like I would schedule other stuff, like, okay, if we can't play Curse of Strahd because someone's out, do you guys want to play this one shot? And a couple of people would express interest, and then we would try to schedule it, and it wouldn't really happen. And so after a couple of months of this, just because we were all busy, I was just not into it anymore.
Yeah.
And so I eventually called the ball and said, okay, this isn't happening. Especially because once we began comparing our schedules again, they really didn't seem compatible. And we had made an agreement at the beginning of the campaign that we would not continue if someone had to drop out. Like, we were going to do it with the 4 of us. And if something made it infeasible for us to continue that way, we would just freeze it and maybe revisit it at a later date. We would not push on.
Right.
And I don't think there's a right or a wrong answer to that. I think I'm glad we did it that way. Like, I'm glad we didn't keep going without Nerf. What we did instead was we started a new campaign and a new system. We moved on to Delta Green, which also then did not go well. Or I don't want to say it didn't go well. It did not resolve from a plot standpoint. So
yeah, it also trailed off.
Right. So that was, I think, largely the same. It was mostly a scheduling thing. But this is another case where I simply lost enthusiasm for the game. I couldn't tell you specifically why. I just did, and didn't think anyone would be bothered by me saying, hey, can we do something else? And so we, at your request, did kind of a closing where we tried to put a bow on it.
Yeah, which is not exactly what I had requested, but
it wasn't. But it was, I would have been happy to just leave it. You wanted to give it a little more closure, which I think was the right move. And then we talked about exactly what to do with respect to that. This is a side thing, but friend of the podcast, Roland, recently listened through Golden River Underground and gave us his feedback, which was very insightful. And I think he made some really good points. In essence, what he was saying was it was very slow, and it was a little confused with respect to, whether or not it was going to be like character driven or scenario driven, and we weren't really consistent with what we bit into. I completely agree with all that.
I can definitely. I mean, again, we had that feedback on session 9 of like, what are you even doing? Like, what is this supposed to be?
Yes,
and there's definitely there two very different perspectives there, as there often is with this kind of stuff. Like an inside versus outside view. As a player, man, I don't care at all. Like as long as I'm having fun. But yeah, if you're in the audience, which this is a show in a sense. It's a show in the sense that other people can view it, not in the sense that we have constructed it deliberately to, entertain others.
Yeah. Now, addressing that, yes, it is a show, but I would say it's a show, but it's not a performance.
Yeah. Okay, that's a better way to put it.
And from the outset, I really wanted our podcast to be something that was, a recording of like a genuine hangout between friends.
Yeah.
And so I like the messiness. Like I like that I had a ton of fun playing Golden River Underground. And it's funny, I actually was recently on a road trip with my girlfriend, and I listen to a lot of podcasts, but I'm not going to force her to listen to my podcast. That's too far.
Yeah.
And I say that because I know friends of ours who have either listened to the podcast or have been on the podcast before that have tried to do that to wives and girlfriends with mixed results.
Yeah.
And I'm much more of a hey, let's listen to 25 hours straight of hardcore history kind of guy.
Yeah.
And she had actually asked, every once in a while she'll ask, let's listen to the next episode of, Golden River Underground or something. And going back and re-listening to it, it's very funny. We're obviously having a good time.
Yeah.
And so, my goal was met. We had fun playing, and I think it comes across as fun and interesting to a listener. But it does not hold up against something like Black Project Gaming or Pretending to Be People or something like that with respect to a good, coherent, long-form plot.
Yeah. Well, and it could be that one day the members of Late Afternoon Gaming, get to a point in our lives where we have enough predictability in our schedules that we can handle something that's a little more rigid. Hey, on the first and third Saturday of every month, we can record a session. And that's set in stone, and there's no issue with that. Maybe we'll get there one day. But we are not there now.
No, and I mean, this is probably obvious to everyone, but we're somewhat young guys that are still going through changes in careers and stuff like that. So there's just been life turbulence.
Yeah.
Driving a lot of that one would expect to kind of norm out in the coming years.
Yeah. I mean, I'm about to move again here in about a month and a half. I'll be leaving where I'm at and going back to school, which means I'll then be, doing some sort of transition again within another year or two. So I'm going to continue to be, temporarily reliable, but then, with a big question mark, hazy cloud after that. So, yeah, that's going to keep happening, unfortunately. But I do want to say on, for both Curse of Strahd and Golden River Underground, they both didn't finish in a way that's satisfying in a lot of ways. However, I don't look at those campaigns as failures in that way. I wish they had finished, but from my perspective as a player of those, I'm like, there were so many great moments and there's so many great things to go back and listen to still that, even though they didn't finish, that's something that would have been nice, but is ultimately not the biggest deal in the world to me, being on the back end of it, because there's so many moments that I'll always remember, and even if I can't remember them, I can just go back and listen to them. I frequently talk about in Curse of Strahd Session 4, us getting to Valakias. The whole session is totally dynamite. It's still great. And then there's another moment later on when we're fighting the abbot at the Abbey of St. Markovia. And he throws, you have this character throw back my Light of Dawn's kind of twisted morality back at him. And it's like the funniest thing ever when it happens. There are those little moments that just stick out to me as something that's so awesome that at the end of the day, if the worst thing I can say about the campaign is that it kind of trailed off and didn't end, it's that's not so bad.
Yeah, that is a great clarification. That none of these are failures, or I don't consider them that way.
Yeah,
it's a failure, I think, if if it feels like a chore and you're unhappy with it and you don't get anything out of it.
Yeah, no, that's exactly right.
And I even in that first campaign that I said you and I were basically fighting through. That set us up. I mean, we learned a lot from it, and it set us up for some really good stuff.
Yeah. So
that was necessary work that needed to be done. And then all of these other ones have been fun, and they ended. So I guess there's a little more to take us up to present day, which is while we were doing... I'm trying to remember when exactly I started this. This was probably towards the end of Curse of Strahd. I started running a campaign for coworkers, which at the time was very low effort, but then started to pick up steam. So the group that I've run it for has changed significantly. I only have a couple of the original members, and a few people left, and a lot of people have joined. And this is interesting because although we are using module material, there's not supposed to be an end to the campaign. This is supposed to be we're coworkers and we play D&D together in perpetuity. And there are chapters to it, but it's not like at any point we're going to achieve some kind of objective and then stop playing. So I approach it differently as a result. But something... so we shifted maybe 4 months ago to an open table concept. Previously, we'd just been playing every Monday, and then we shifted to an open table where I told everybody, because we'd gotten too big, we'd gotten to the point where we had 7 players and several waitlisted people, which sounds crazy. And but not everyone can be there every time, and some people only want to come once a month, and some people want to come to everything and play even more. And so what I said was, okay, here's the deal. I'm available Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday nights, which is not to say I'm always available all those nights, or that I'm going to play 3 nights a week, just that I don't have standing commitments on Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday nights. And we've got this shared document that I put these adventure descriptions and threads on, like I described before. We were already in an established campaign setting, so people knew what the world was and what the factions were and who was out there, and they had a main quest and some side quests. And I gave them the model I described earlier, where I said, this is player driven now. Unless anyone puts together a group and wants to do something specific, there are no more regular sessions. We do not just play on Monday nights. If you want to do something, get a group of people together, tell me, and then I'll prep that, and we'll play it. And so we were playing... I was usually running 2 nights a week, because usually 2 groups, sometimes with some of the same people, would be, doing miscellaneous things, and all of those, call them quests, that take, between 2 and 5 sessions, begin and end at the same geographic point within the setting. And then we just tracked which characters were currently embarked on which quests. That way, one character wasn't in two places at once.
Right.
Well, that seemed like it was going really well until one of my players went on vacation for like a month, and it became crystal clear that she was the one basically arranging everything. And so we basically went from having this very active table where a bunch of different quests were happening and we were playing really regularly to like nothing. And I didn't do anything. I didn't set anything up because this is kind of an experiment because, I don't know, people online have talked about these West Marches campaign setups for a long time, and I've never actually known anyone who's done it. And so...
Right, yeah. It's like this, it may be mythical, like there's no evidence that's actually happening anywhere.
Right, and you look at it and you're like, this is fascinating. It's sort of like this communist mirage, where you're like, well, in theory, that might be, that's perfect. That's like utopian. But you look a little closer and you're like, I don't know if that actually works. Like,
yeah. I'd really have to see that to believe it.
Yeah, I don't know about that. So when this happened, when she went on vacation, and I realized, server's been pretty quiet. Haven't gotten any requests recently. A couple of people asked me like, "Hey, are you going to do anything?" And I was like, "No, I want to see what happens." Like, we might have a dead month,
right?
And that's okay. Like, I see this as a feature, I guess to a point. And what I mean by that is, this concept is very player driven. I think, a traditional model where everybody shows up at the designated time, say Monday nights, it fosters laziness, like it fosters apathy.
Yes.
And so people will just show up, and they'll show up unprepared. They didn't level. So they're gonna level at the table, and that takes time. And people will kind of show up just because they'll do it out of habit, but maybe they're distracted. They don't really want to be there. Like, this is just what they do on Monday nights. Mm-hmm. And of course, that's absolutely not a rule. Plenty of people show up and they're plugged in and they want to play and stuff. But that's the point. Is it's a mixed bag of people that are there for different reasons and have different levels of interest and enthusiasm.
Yeah.
In theory, with the open table, only very interested, dialed-in people will show up because there is no regular game anymore.
Right. Like if they're not asking for a game, then there is no game.
Yes. This is like the hinge of TTRPGs. Is it
I don't
Hinge,
know enough
or is
about
it Bumble?
dating apps to get that. Bumble's the one where the woman has to initiate it.
Yes. Well, and so as a dungeon master, I'm the woman here, where no, that's not right. The players are the women, because the players now have to ask me out.
Uh-huh.
Predictably, that doesn't work very well. So,
I think it's something that I think one of the things that can enhance that is the players have to understand that is going to be the case. And
this has been an ongoing problem for us, because there are some players that
be reminded.
I can't break through to.
Yeah.
Where you describe this scheme, you say, hey, we're not playing on Mondays anymore, or not regularly. We will play on Mondays a lot, probably, but it's not a given. And I've given you all these adventure options, and if you tell me what you want to do, we'll set up a schedule for you to do that, but there's no regular programming. Mm-hmm. And then some guy will be like, so are we playing on Mondays or not? And you're like, well,
what did I just say?
It's complicated, but you're probably not playing on Mondays. It's like, because I'm free on Tuesdays, and you're like, okay, that's not what I'm saying.
Yeah.
So I have a couple of players that it's been months, and they'll still, they'll periodically pop up in the Discord, and they'll be like, are we playing this Monday? And it's like, bro, come on. So my player is now back from vacation. It's Jessie, obviously.
Right.
And she's very organized and very, I don't know, insistent on clarity, right? So she will like pin people down in the server and say, "Hey, are you coming or not?"
Yeah, right.
You know?
Everyone needs to give me an affirmative answer on.
Right.
Yeah.
I have to know. We're picking up tacos, and like, are you going to be here? Or
yeah.
That kind of thing. So, so the considerations here, though, from a scheduling standpoint and a campaign wrap-up standpoint, are very different. Because rewinding a little bit, when I kicked this game off for my coworkers a year and a half ago, we had severe scheduling issues. We were playing on Monday evenings, and I was playing for the first time. I was running a game for people that I didn't know, and just like they weren't friends of mine, and they were really nice, but we didn't have fantastic chemistry, and we were not going to become friends as a result of playing together. So, I was happy to play the game with them, but we didn't develop friendships as a result of playing, if that makes sense. And I'm trying to remember what I started with. I think I published like a Google Sheets calendar that I made to the group initially and said, okay, please like use this little tracker thing I made to tell me when you're going to be available, because I want to be able to cancel sessions earlier if people aren't going to be available. And it just didn't work. Like, I just couldn't get people to populate it with their availability.
Right.
Even when I did stuff like at the table, first thing for the session, when I would, I'd say, okay, I know if I tell you guys now to update the calendar and then we play for 2 hours, you're going to go home and forget, and we're just going to have this conversation again next week. So we're going to stop right now. Everyone get your phones out. And
we're not starting this session until the calendar's updated.
Yeah, we're going to update the calendars right now.
Yeah.
And, then someone's like, well, I didn't bring my phone. Or like, I don't know. Like, somehow
then tell me your availability and I will put it
that fails, right? And they're like, well, I don't have my work calendar in front of me. So that didn't work. And we had a couple of things that really made me angry. Like, we had a day when one of the players showed up to play, and it was me and them just waiting, and nobody else came.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, I'm sorry. Like, I'm sorry you drove here. This is shitty. Obviously, we're not playing now.
Mm-hmm. But you get to level up.
Right. I mean, I felt bad. And so at the next session, I was like, guys, like, you need to get religion on this calendar thing.
Mm-hmm.
It's killing me. It's rude to everyone else at the table. Like, just populate the fucking calendar. Yeah. It probably got a little preachy. I was like, I don't understand why. Like, I am like bringing this wagon full of like D&D bullshit. I provide all these references. Like, I'm doing all this work to make this thing happen, and you can't fill in a calendar to let me know when you want me to run the game. That's it's making me angry.
Right. Yeah.
And I was clear. I was like, if you do not fill it out before the next session, we're done. If you have trouble accessing it, let me know. But so anyway, next session they come up and it's not filled in, and I told them to get lost.
Right.
Which
is pretty baller. I like that.
It's not often that as a DM I have fired people.
Right.
It was absolutely the right move for the game. We kept the players that were like team players, and then we after that I was like, all right, well, we just lost half the group, so what are you guys thinking? You want to do a new campaign? Do you want to do a new system? And we wound up shifting systems and settings and bringing in some other people in. And so it was very much like a, cutting the dead branches off the tree kind of thing. Like, it's healthy. But I do think that's something that people should consider if they're thinking through this campaign scheduling stuff is you want to come up with like tools and communication methods that your players are going to use. That can be difficult. So like, I like using Discord, and most younger people are fine with that, but some aren't. And the older people really struggle.
Yeah.
They don't understand it, and so this is no different from working with people who don't understand how Microsoft Teams or Outlook work.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
Right, and it's just you need to understand that it's very unlikely that someone is going to learn how to use a piece of software to play your game, and a lot of people just don't feel bad about. I guess basically they'll know that they are lacking some critical skill that they need to stay in comms, and they just won't resolve that. Mm-hmm. So there is no one-size-fits-all solution to this. You need to come up with a method for managing calendars and communicating, both from a logistics standpoint and from a game standpoint. Like, you got to figure out who's going to bring the snacks and what snacks they're bringing. And if one of your players doesn't have a cell phone and won't get one and only communicates, by like smoke signals and the rest of your players all have like Neuralink and are communicating telepathically about what food they want, that's going to be tricky.
Right. Yeah, and again, much like having a schedule that doesn't fit, having like a mentality that doesn't fit when it comes to logistics, punctuality, whatever, may also mean that, this person may not be a good fit for that table.
Yes. Yeah, and I guess very much associate punctuality and logistics and the communication that makes logistics possible. Like those are like basic adult responsibility things to me.
Right.
And so if someone's not on the same page with me there, and I don't mean like they have a slightly different way of doing it. I mean, if someone is flaky on that kind of stuff, that irritates me and I don't want to do things with them.
Mm-hmm.
And
right. You have little patience for that.
Right. And so that doesn't mean you can't play with someone like that, but it may mean that you can't do anything complicated. You need to have something that's very regular. We're going to play every Monday night in the same place, and the same person's going to get pizza every time. That kind of thing. Something that is robust enough that it can survive bad communications.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. If you lack rigidity in your schedule, that works for some people. That flexibility can be really good for them, and it can encourage, as you said earlier, like participation, where they can't fall into a rhythm that makes them lazy. But some people cannot deal with inflexibility. Right. That just means that nothing's happening, or they give up, or something like that. So different people react to those kinds of things differently, and you need to kind of measure that for the people you're working with. Yeah.
I guess that's really the extent to my campaign experience. I have other. Well, actually, I guess that's not true. The stuff that I've run, the stuff that I have been a player in has predominantly been online, the exception being your early campaign that we talked about.
Yeah.
And those have been pretty regular. Those have been things that are run, combination of Roll20 and Discord. We play the same night each week, and that's pretty straightforward. I guess I don't have a lot to say about those campaign wrap-ups. I think in every case, I didn't complete some kind of major arc, like I just played for some period of time that I was available to play on that night. I was mostly coming into campaigns that were already in progress, and then leaving once my schedule no longer supported it. Maybe that's a couple of months later, maybe it's 2 years later. So those were like perpetual campaigns, like they just go on and on and on. Sure. And people kind of come and go as their schedule allows. Something I've become more aware of is that my friends that are married with children tend to want to play on weeknights very late at night. Mm-hmm. So this is like
they can fight for that time more easily because fewer people are competing for it.
Yes, yeah. So they can't have a commitment on a weekend. It's just not going to happen, and they have family stuff to do, immediately after work on weekdays. But like I played in one campaign. Everybody always laughs when I say this, but like I've played in a campaign for a long time that was 9 p.m. to about midnight to 1 a.m. on Tuesday nights.
Right, yeah.
That sucks. Now, in my case, though, and Jesse makes fun of me about this sometimes because we would like grab dinner after work or something, and I'd be looking at my watch. I'd be like, "Yeah, I got like another 2 hours to kill before the game kicks off." Right? She would just laugh at me and say, "Like, you're retarded."
Yeah.
That's stupid. I don't know though. I mean, on the one hand, yes, that's a shitty time to play. On the other hand, if it's, sometimes that's what it takes to like spend some time with the boys. Yeah. And that's worth something.
Yeah. And whether that's coming from because you've got a family, or it's because you've got a job that takes up a lot of your time, or you're always on call or something like that. There's all sorts of reasons that people can't commit to anything super regular. Or if they can, it's outside of what most normal people would find to be, desirable. And it sucks because you don't want to just exclude them and be like, well, if you can't commit, then and then just like not include them and stuff. Like that kind of sucks. But at the same time, their scheduling issues shouldn't entirely dictate your life either. Again, it's a conversation. Hopefully people can be adults about it and, accept that they may not be a good fit, or that, conditions don't allow them to join in on this one or something like that.
Yeah. Yeah. I do want to kind of drop a note in here I do tend to take kind of a hard line on proactive scheduling and communications and being considerate of other people's time and that kind of thing. Yeah. Especially when it comes to the people that are running these games, or the people that are offering up their houses to host this stuff, or the people that are like making dinner, people who are really investing in this stuff beyond just showing up. But adults are busy, and people go through rough patches, and it's worth taking a minute to consider where someone is in their life. And so even if they're kind of hard to play with, it may be worth your while to, make some concessions to make sure that they're welcome at the table, just because, that might be like an important part of their week. Yes.
And sometimes they will make that known, and sometimes they won't, that this is actually like a really big deal to them. I know you've talked before if you had some players who had, like this is like their one thing that they do. It's like their one social activity at this point in their life because they're busy or other people have moved away or, whatever.
Yeah, and that's definitely something that's gotten more visible to me as I've gotten older, that there are a lot of folks out there that are, they have a lot of responsibility, or they have difficult stuff going on. They have like family members that are sick, or their marriage is not good, or they're just constantly running around. Like, they have kids that are in a million sports, and they and the wife both work, and they don't have a lot of time for social stuff. And this one 3-hour block each week where they can kick back, have a beer, kill some goblins, like this is it. And this is one of the things that as a DM, pushes me to do a little more prep. I'm a low prep DM, but pushes me to make sure that I'm there on my A game, ready to deliver a good session. And when it makes sense to overlook a lot of the things that I just said make me angry, because you want to do a good thing.
Yeah, and in much the same way this is true for almost every set of human interactions, I think it's wise to like consider whether something that you're looking at is a one-off or a habit. Right? Like if somebody people just have bad days sometimes, or people forget things. So if someone forgets to put something on the schedule once, okay, just remind them. It's whatever. If this is the third time in a row, okay, we've got a pattern now. So now it's time to figure out whether it's, something they just need some more structure, and so we do the thing that you described where before we start the session, everyone fills out the calendar, for the next 2 weeks or whatever. Or if it's a one-person problem, maybe just addressing it with them or whatever. But, emotions can run high in all sorts of things, and TTRPGs are, no exception to that rule. And so it can, just take a step back if you're feeling hurt about something and try and figure out whether this is something that's only happened once or if you're detecting a pattern, and that can help you to figure out what the right course of action is at that point. Hey, this is one time, so I'm just going to be watchful for it, or it's a pattern, I need to do something.
Yeah. And in terms of actually making this stuff happen, it is okay to tell your players that, you need them to be more clear. You're not being an asshole by saying, hey, I put together a calendar and I really need you guys to fill it out. Because I got to know how many people I'm running for. Or I got to know when to cancel stuff. And I think a lot of people are, it's very easy, given the asymmetric nature of the effort that goes into this hobby, for you as someone who's running a game to become frustrated. Mm-hmm. And that's not good. Not only is it just going to make it more difficult for you to enjoy the hobby, but it's just easier as a player. You have less to manage, and you show up, and it's similar to the creative side of it, where you're just naturally going to be sensitive to criticism if it's of something that you created. If you write something or draw something, or you created this NPC, or you created this cool dungeon or something like that, it's easy as a player to casually criticize that, and you're going to be much more sensitive to that as a DM, because it's that's your labor.
Yeah. And
the scheduling thing, I think, is very similar. It's quick for a player can make an offhanded remark or joke, or forget to roger up to a particular session and think nothing of it because it's not a big deal. And for the DM to kind of fly off the handle and be like, I was drawing maps for 3 hours on Saturday, and and you can't even tell me if you're fucking gonna be here.
Right.
Just figure out something that works for the group.
Yeah. By the way, I found something just now that it speaks to some of this, and I think it's kind of funny. So I wrote right before the end of that first campaign, which is called the Shattered Isle, the one that we were discussing as your first experience as a player.
Yeah.
I wrote this document that's called Lessons Learned from the Shattered Isle, which is right before the final session. And I just want to read something that I said on the kind of the cover page, which again, this is in retrospect had a lot of positives coming out of it, a lot of things that I learned, but it was a negative thing at the time.
This must be an angry document.
Oh, dude. I don't even know if I can send it to you. I need to read it first. Let's see if I can send it to you. So I said, blah, blah, blah. Before or during my Curse of Strahd campaign, I genuinely looked forward to each session. However, with this one, I've come to dread the actual act of playing the game with my current party. I enjoy doing the prep for the story and building the session in my mind more than I enjoy actually running it. I find myself trying to figure out how my players will ruin everything and come up with how to react to various ridiculous actions they will take, instead of trying to figure out how to craft a fun experience. This is definitely a very angry document.
Yes.
And so I'm gonna read through it, and if there's nothing too bad in it, I'll send it to you so you can read it. But
well, no pressure, because we're lucky I didn't write anything during Tomb of Annihilation.
Yeah.
I was going out, we would take a mid-session break, and I was going out into my backyard, and just thinking I'm gonna walk back in there and cancel the rest of the campaign.
Right. I wouldn't blame you.
I hate this, and I was dead set on as soon as if I do continue, once this campaign is over, I'm dissolving this group. I'm going to delete the server. It was it made me angry.
Yeah.
And, I for whatever reason, I didn't do that. And, I'm grateful because we've had a lot of fun since then. And those, as you described them, were important growing pains. But yeah, that doesn't surprise me. That very much aligns with what I was thinking when I ran my campaign. And the funny thing is, and this is not related to the topic of this podcast at all, but
this one's been pretty loose anyway, so
I think it's been extremely tight.
Oh, okay.
I'm pretty sure that many of the things you did that frustrated me as a player during the Shattered Isle, I immediately did.
Yeah, right.
In my own campaign, and vice versa.
No doubt, absolutely.
I mean, it was we did some personal recordings of Tomb of Annihilation. I will not watch them.
Yeah,
because they would just make me uncomfortable.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, they also just suck quality wise, but
sure,
far beyond that. Yeah, they're not good.
Yeah. So.
Yeah. Oh no. So I'm just scrolling through this document. And one of my big complaints was that your character Balasar just would not be a team player with everyone else, which was not just you. We had a weird problem at the beginning of that campaign where no one wanted to work together as a party.
Yes.
So, and that was just the first of many issues. But yeah, and then I turn around and I'm playing Claire in Tomb of Annihilation. And I don't think that she was horrible about being a team player, but it certainly, you wouldn't have thought that I was thinking really hard about how to make her a great team player. By the way I was playing, like, I have this huge commentary on how that's really important, and then as soon as I'm playing, I didn't really do that much better. So, to your point, kind of turning around and failing to improve on anything, despite our long and detailed list of critiques of each other.
Yeah, well, and the little bit of your notes there that you read about enjoying preparing and envisioning how the session might be, but actually really not enjoying them in practice.
Yeah.
I think is very normal, especially as a younger DM who, basically preps in an ineffective way and is like has a vision that they have decided they want the players to. They have a plan for the players.
Mm-hmm.
Which is, the same kind of thing I had to figure out. We're like, that's not how it works.
Right.
That's not how this hobby works. These are cases though where, yeah, it's all well and good that we're like in a better place now and we run and playing games that are a lot of fun consistently. But I really think players and DMs should think about this. Like, I know there are a bunch of people out there that are like playing in games that they don't like because they don't part of it might be that they actually don't like playing. I've made fun of what I've called D&D masturbators before. This is what Caboose and I call people who collect the books and maybe listen to actual play podcasts and stuff like that, but when given the opportunity to play in a real game, they're not interested. Like, they don't actually want sex; they want to watch porn and masturbate.
Mm-hmm.
And I say it jokingly, but I do get it. I understand.
Yeah.
If you are. I understand for the exact same reason. Like, I get that if you're just looking through podcasts or you're reading the books or something like that, you can just go for exactly what you find interesting.
Right.
And it takes as little or as much time as you want. And, there's no commitment to it. And sure, it might not measure up to the amount of fun you would have if you really like had the perfect game with like your best friends that was totally clicking, but you can have a lot of fun that way.
Yeah.
And if you go to the local comic shop and you play a game with strangers and it doesn't go very well, you may well walk away from that thinking that's not nearly as much fun as just like listening to an actual play. I really do get that, and I guess my position on this has somewhat softened. Where I'm still gonna joke and make fun of them and call them masturbators. But I guess the hidden thing here is like, there's nothing wrong with masturbating.
Well, but I think more broadly, you could say the same thing about most other hobbies as well. Like, it's a kind of a different experience, watching or being an observer of something versus being a participant. There are lots of people who really love watching sports, but are terrible at playing them and wouldn't have any fun and might get hurt. And you can apply the same kind of, different set of like enjoyment criteria to any activities. Some people might really like eating food, but are terrible at cooking, and don't enjoy it. Right. They're very different experiences. One thing that I read, and I keep bringing up this book, Proactive Role Playing, but, it's just got a lot of really good tidbits in it. And one of them is talking about kind of structuring your campaign. And the whole point of this thing is that you shouldn't have a bunch of structure, or their technique does not rely on having a lot of structure. And they think that's probably not appropriate for this hobby, much in the same way as you were saying, like, it's a collaborative hobby. So if you as the DM are saying, like, this is exactly how the story's going to go, like, you might want to just write something instead, or do something else where you have the creative control to dictate those things. If you're trying to, like, override what the players want to do and make it about your plot, then this might just be the wrong medium for the story you're trying to tell.
Yeah. That's a good point.
Yeah.
Maybe you don't actually want what you think you want.
Yeah. Or the thing that you want just isn't suitable for the place where you're trying to make it happen. And again, that's why I like the idea more of doing that, the homebrew kind of loose free flow that, hey, let's just go kill some goblins, just do whatever kind of campaign sounds a lot more interesting to me than a Curse of Strahd, where, there's a big there's a big dragon we have to go fight, and we have to go, I think the structure in some way is constraining to this style of storytelling that maybe isn't as productive as or productive isn't really the right word, but you might find that it's better to just do something that's a little more free form and coming up with goals as things come up, and then you can do a little structure for a couple sessions on how we're going to achieve that one specific thing, and move on from there.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. I don't know.
So yeah, this one's been kind of all over the place, but which is fine, whatever. This is, as we said at the top, a little more just, hey, what has our experience been, and what are some things that have come up, and hopefully if you're listening to this, then something about what we're talking about, has turned a light bulb on for you as we discuss a similar kind of problem.
But I would like to do a little bit of nutshelling to kind of succinctly, at least, dish out what I think are the important nuggets from this.
Please.
To the last point you just made, experiment with different aspects or alternative forms of, what you think you might find fun. Maybe you just want to read or listen or write, and it doesn't have to be playing or running. I also think you should experiment with, like, if you've always run, try to play, and vice versa. Even if you don't like it, it might give you a different perspective or appreciation. Scheduling is huge, and it's hard.
Yes.
That's both true in the sense of, people are busy and they have, they have commitments and jobs and stuff like that. But it's also difficult to even know what people's schedules are, and in many cases they don't know what their schedules are. So there's no solution that is going to work for every group. You need to probably come up with an app you're going to communicate through, or are you going to use email? Are you going to use text? Are you going to create a Google Doc? Are you going to have a shared Google Calendar? How are you going to know when people are coming and when they're not? If it's really hard to do this with your group, it's probably better to pick something really regular, like play, in the same day, play on the same day at the same time in the same place, with the same people bringing the food every time. Not all campaigns need to be long. It's not necessarily bad if you don't achieve some kind of plot objective. You can still have great sessions and all the way up until it ends for whatever reason it ends. And, you know, the case in point, my favorite campaign that we've done so far has not resolved from a plot standpoint, and my least favorite ones have. Not because of that, just as an illustration that maybe that's not that important. If you find people who are going to be who aren't going to be flaky.
Yes,
you
right.
Can't,
and
you can't train someone not to be a flake, or that's at least a much larger project than you're qualified to take on as a DM. Right.
It's the same thing you've been saying for forever, like or recently anyway. The one of the best things you can do to ensure a good experience is it all starts and virtually or kind of ends with who is at the table. Right. If I've got people who can't facilitate the kind of experience that is going to be fun, then it doesn't really matter what I do after that point, or it's going to be so much work that maybe it's not worth it.
Yeah. Oh, there's one final thing that I just remembered that I'd like to put out, which is consider moving some things to out of session. So, for example, in my Monday night game, I have shifted shopping to out of session.
Yeah.
If, I basically publish a price list, the players know how much money they have, and they're able to buy things between sessions as long as they're back at, like, the main hub city.
Right.
Same with leveling. Everyone has all the documents, like all the references they need to level up out of session. And there's even some other stuff where, based on the setup I have for the campaign, the open table thing, players can, they can have more than one character because they might be engaging in more than one quest at a time. And so that means that sometimes they've got two characters and one character is essentially idle. And I let them do other stuff with that character. Like they can dedicate them to some task. They can have them doing like research or, maybe making inroads in some organization that the players want to ally with, or developing a skill or something like that. I kind of leave that up to the players, like what they want to propose to me that this other character could do. And that's normally something that I say, we'll maybe briefly discuss it, and I say, okay, send me the details on Discord, like what you think you want to do. And I might have them make some dice rolls, but this is all, maybe then the mechanics of it are kind of boring, and it's only about one player, so I don't want to waste session time on it.
Right.
But if someone's doing research, and so it's lore that I either have to generate or look up, it's way better to do that offline. It both decompresses the session time, and it actually allows me to tackle it, when I'm in front of my computer with my references and my notes. So
sorry, you just cut out a little bit.
We're talking more like session levels.
I think it's like a network thing.
Oh, did I cut out?
Are you there?
Yeah. Can you hear me?
I can hear you. Yeah.
Okay. Well, fortunately, the recording's uncontaminated.
Yeah. I'll figure that out.
But anyway, what I was saying was, I know this is like a lower level, like scheduling at the session level kind of stuff, and not at the campaign level. But there are things you can do to make sure that you make the best use of the time you have together as a group.
Right.
And so, as well as coming up with something where you can coordinate schedules, coming up with some effective way to communicate and rules and standards for what that communication can or should be used for, can facilitate them showing up much better prepared, and just generally like keep things well oiled. So,
yeah. Well, and I think, one of the consequences of doing stuff like shopping at the table is that's a quick way to get people disengaged. If, one person is talking with you for 15 minutes about like, well, what about this? How much does this cost? Well, what does this do? Like, it's very excusable in my mind if a player, someone who isn't doing the shopping right there, just like kind of falls asleep. I get that. Like that to me is one of those kind of notoriously boring things that when someone else is doing it, you're just like, okay, yeah. So it's also almost entirely administrative. So yeah, absolutely. If you can't handle that outside of session, great. There are shopping experiences that can be really interesting. Like, we're going to a witch's hut and she's giving us, some dread artifacts or something like that. So, well, now there's like a role-playing element that goes into it. But yeah, if you're just picking up a new standard weapon, yeah, whatever. Just do that outside of session, whatever.
Right. Okay. That's all I've got.
Okay. Yeah, I think that was pretty good.